So the question is, how do I think social media has affected cults, and what about corporate cults? Let's talk about it. I'm Daniella, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God cult and then going into the US Army, looking at those cult parallels. And you can get an autographed copy from me up there or in the description. So social media has, of course, changed the game for cults, right? So in the late 60s, early 70s, around the time my grandfather joined the Children of God religious cult, if you wanted to isolate an American, truly isolate them, you almost had to take them away to your compound in Mexico or Texas or Brazil, right? Because all Americans were watching the same three television stations, listening to the same radio, right? Reading the same newspaper. So even if you were kind of on polar opposite sides of an issue, you still had this shared reality. And for the coercive control to work, they would need to separate you from that. Social media has changed the game, right? We are like now on TikTok, where I have 100,000 followers, and like this is its whole own world, right? Most of the people in my real life barely registers to them that I am like TikTok famous or I have this whole life where I do this stuff, right? Because they just don't have to see it. So that being said, the silos, right? The silos are one of the big things that has changed. And this is why President Obama spent part of his last speech in office talking about this and warning about this, right? The big upset of the Trump election was because of these silos that in large part the internet has helped us create. Not only because of, right? But that was why it surprised a lot of people when it happened. So that being said, right, social media has changed the game for isolation. We can see on the Twin Flames documentary that this one girl is like living with her family, but she's just like in a cult in her bedroom, right? So that is something that has changed. That being said, social media also helps a lot of people get out of cults, right? What are we doing now? Or deconstruct their cults. And then the final thing is social media has made it possible for like, no matter what your niche idea or worldview is, you can find other people that have that same worldview. So in many ways, it's made recruiting for cult leaders a lot easier. That being said, it's also maybe taking away the requirement strictly to have a leader, right? QAnon did not exactly have a leader, right? And so this one is funny because when people are like, can't be a cult, don't have a leader, AA, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, it's like, actually, first of all, there's a thing called leadership by proxy or charisma by proxy. And second of all, the leader thing is the one we are seeing changing kind of the most in modernity. The one thing I would like to say is this is also true about COVID, both of these things, right? COVID had a lot of people going to cults because everyone is going through extreme isolation in their own homes. But COVID also got a lot of people out of cults and coercive groups because they couldn't physically go to their groups or their meetings or their Bible studies or whatever it was. They started to realize they didn't need that and that their life is in fact much better without those coercive groups being involved. So that's a little rundown on social media, the internet, isolation, how it has all changed cults. The final part of that question is, what do you think about corporate cults? And I think corporate cults definitely exist. WeWork being one of the primo examples. And I was running a nonprofit at the time that got swallowed up by WeWork in 2018. So I just had a front row seat to the culting of WeWork. Theranos, the fake blood testing company, another one. Zappos under Tony Hsieh, another one. Juul, the vape pen, another one, right? There are a lot of corporate cults. I think Google and Microsoft like really toe that line. But I think there's a difference between like a company that was started out with good intent, like probably Microsoft, and then just like evolves to be kind of toxic and kind of culty and isolated and have a lot of these things on the list. But then there's also companies like those other four that I mentioned that I don't think they were ever started out with good intent. They were started out to build a following and make the leaders billions of dollars. Like that's what they were for. And those can be really, really horrible, toxic places to work. One of the things that we always see with cults is people unaliving themselves. And in all four of those groups that I mentioned, in all four of those corporations that I mentioned, we saw a significant amount of that as well. So that's one of these things that I'm always like looking out for when I'm assessing groups as culty or not. Hopefully that helped to answer this question, and thank you so much for engaging.